Welcome, everyone. This is Conrad. I'm the co-chair of the PyData Global 2021 conference. We're very happy today to welcome Juan to come talk to us about documenting your scientific project with Markdown, Sphinx, and read the docs. And with that, I'll let Juan, you take it away for the workshop. Thanks, guys.
All right, so before that, a bit of an introduction of myself. So my name is Juan Luis. I'm an aerospace engineer, and I'm a self-taught Pythonista from Spain. At the moment, working as developer advocate at Read the Docs, which is a hosting company for documentation. I'm very involved with the Python community in Spain. So I'm a founding member and former president of the Python España Nonprofit Association. And I organized all the 7 in-person editions of PyCon Spain. And I retired right before the pandemic came. So that's a win. I've been contributing to many scientific Python projects. So I have some early contributions to SciPy and created some CondaForge packages. I'm a core developer of AstroPy as well, and some others. And I'm also teaching Python for big data and data science in a couple of private universities here in Spain. Okay, so first of all, what is Sphinx? I don't know if I see reactions here, hopefully yes. May you raise your hands virtually if you have already used Sphinx for documentation? I see 4 people, 5, 6. Okay, so there's one person that said no directly, and wow, how many people are here? Okay, so there's a number of people that have already used it. Okay, so Sphinx, according to its own documentation, is a tool that makes it easy to create intelligent and beautiful documentation. You have the website here. And the way Sphinx works is by reading a set of source files and then generating some output. These source files can be written in reStructuredText markup, which is the default, Markdown, which is the one that we're going to see before, but they can also be Python source files, Jupyter notebooks, images, and all of that. And the output can be HTML, but also PDF, manual pages for Linux and Unix, EPUB, and many other things. So in a way, Sphinx is a static site generator, maybe one of the first static site generators existing. It's not very trendy these days, but it's still alive and kicking. So some of the interesting functionalities of it is, as I said, that it has multiple output formats that they call builders. It's very straightforward to introduce cross-references and automatic hyperlinks for several elements of the documentation, not only sections, documents, headings, and stuff like that, but also figures, glossary terms, code objects, and more. You define the structure using a tree of documents, and from there, Sphinx automatically generates breadcrumbs, navigation, and things like that. It numbers figures and other objects automatically. It can highlight the syntax of code source files, and it's very extensible. There's a number of extensions developed by the community that you can use, and some of them are very popular. So our objective for today is to document a very small Python library that I created for the Sphinx tutorial that I've been writing for the past months, that is already online, and that we also reused for our own Read the Docs tutorial, and create our documentation pages step by step. So the few of you that, or the ones that want to follow along, it's already a good moment to click here because it's demo time. I'm going to share this link in the chat just in case. There we go. And what I'm going to use is this Git pod thing. For those of you that don't know it, this gives me a Visual Studio Code interface with a terminal and web server and everything, all in the browser, which is super convenient. So this way I don't need to rely on my local environment this time, although I have a backup in case everything breaks. You know the demo effect that things live tend to break, and this is a 1.5 hour demo, so it's likely that some things will break, but I will try my best for that not to happen. All right, so I already have my VS Code interface, and let's see first what do we have here. So we have a README with just a couple of lines about the project, so nothing fancy here. This PyProject.toml file specifies the metadata of my Python library, which is supposed to be installed and reused. I'm a big fan of packaging standards, so I use the very latest PEP 621 metadata specification for this, and the build backend is Fleet, which is my favorite. We're going to add some extra requirements here. We have the logo, nothing fancy, and we have the code itself. So this is, as I said, a tiny library. It contains a custom exception and a custom function that at the moment returns a hard-coded list of strings. So the idea of the library is that it's supposed to help you create recipes, but at the moment, these random ingredients are very straightforward. Okay, so this is our starting point. And without further ado, let's get started. So the first thing we're going to need is to add Sphinx as our list of requirements. So for that, I'm going to use the same PyProject.toml, so the same metadata specification that I'm using to install the library itself. So I'm going to add here project.optional dependencies. And then I'm going to specify an extra family of dependencies that I will call doc. And I will use Sphinx 4.2.0. Okay, so this is going to be my Sphinx version. By the way, all the things that I'm going to type, if you're lost or you want to catch up at some point or you join late or whatever, they're in this notes.md file that you can find in the repository itself. If I can zoom in, sure, Brandon, I will do that. And it's the toml file, something that I need to make by myself for my own documentation. So the toml file is a way of specifying the dependencies of the Python library. And it's sort of the modern replacement to setup.py, setup.cfg that you might have seen in the wild out there. So yeah, it applies to all Python libraries that you want to create. And let me increase my zoom a little bit. Hope that is better. Let me know otherwise. Okay, so I have my optional dependencies. And now the cool thing is that here I have a Python environment. So my Python version is 3.8. And I'm going to pip install in editable mode my project with this doc extra. There's a chance that this doesn't work. So instead of running to that, I'm going to upgrade pip first. So python-npip install upgrade pip. So that's the first thing. Keep your pip up to date. And now let me pip install -e dot and then the doc dependencies. So this is going to install my small library, lumake.py, and it's also going to install Sphinx and all the transitive dependencies of Sphinx. There we go. So we already have it. And if that's correct, this means that we should already have this sphinx-quickstart command. Let me check if there's things in the chat. I will be checking from time to time. Okay, nothing else. And feel free to send questions in the chat. I might not be super fast to respond, but I will do my best. And if you want to unmute yourself and ask something, I'll be happy to answer as well. If it's something that we will see later on in the tutorial, then I will postpone the question and that's it. Okay, so we already have sphinx-quickstart. So this command is going to generate the basic structure of a Sphinx documentation project. And it receives one parameter, which is the directory where I'm going to have all those files. And I'm going to put it in docs. It's a good practice to have it in its own directory. And now it's going to ask me a series of questions. This is very similar to cookie cutter that you might have seen somewhere else and things like that. So first of all, do I want to separate the source and the build directories? I usually do this in all my projects, even if it's not the default. I think it makes everything cleaner. So I'm going to say Y for yes. Now the project name, I will call it Lumake. And I'm going to type my own author name. I detected some problems with the special characters here. I don't know why, but in any case, nothing important, fortunately. Now the project release, I'm going to write 0.1. Anything works at this moment. And the project language, it's going to be English, so I can leave the default. And I'm done. I'm going to display again, just in case, the answers that I typed for you to see. Yeah, that's it. So separate the source and build directories, the project name, author name, project version, and project language. And this created a number of files that we're going to explore now in a moment. Maxim says, I don't remember if you mentioned, but why do you prefer Sphinx? Why do I prefer Sphinx with respect to other alternatives? You mean like mkdocs, Docusaurus, pdoc? Well, Sphinx is the oldest and probably the most powerful documentation generator. And I think now mkdocs is starting to add like auto summaries, autodoc, cross references, and things like that. These are very recent, but Sphinx is very solid. It's used for the CPython documentation as well. And it has a large number of extensions. So those would be my reasons to prefer that. Ah, hello, Radovan. Yes, I remember you. Okay, so let's see what do we have here. So we have a couple of make files. We're not going to pay much attention to them. We're just going to use them. And the important files are here inside the source directory. So we have our index.rst. This is reStructuredText, although we're going to convert this to Markdown in a moment. And you can see here like some comments. This is a first level heading. This is the talk tree, which is the table of contents tree. We're going to manipulate it in a moment. And then some extra references here. So that is going to be the index of my documentation site. And then very important, I have the conf.py, which is the file that holds all the documentation, sorry, all the configuration of Sphinx. And we're going to make a number of tweaks here. You see it contains the project, copyright, and so forth. Also an empty list of extensions. We're going to add some of them and some other options that we have here. So this is what we have at this moment. And before going any further, it's a good moment to try to see if at least this basic structure already works. So I'm going to split the terminal here with this fancy button that I had on the right. I'm going to change the directory to docs. And thanks to this make file, I can type make HTML, and this is going to build the HTML documentation immediately. You see, well, there's Sphinx logs are quite verbose. I'm not going to analyze everything that we have here, but what we can see is that we don't have any red text, which means that there are no warnings or errors, and therefore everything is more or less working, at least apparently. So this generated a bunch of HTML files here, and what I'm going to do is to serve them with the built-in Python HTTP server. So for that, I do Python -m HTTP server. And this launches a web server on port 8000. And I would love Gitpod to tell me now that it's about to, okay, yes, it took a few seconds, but it works. So this gives me a bunch of options, and I'm going to open the browser here. You have to allow pop-ups for that. And this is my documentation site. So this is the level 1 heading, the extra references, and some other information. So at least for the moment, this is working. Okay, so this is a very good moment to commit my changes. So for that, I'm going to use the source control view here on the left. Let's review what we have. So we added some extra dependencies here for building our documentation, in particular Sphinx 4.2. We also have a couple of makefiles here that we're not going to study in depth. We have our configuration and our index page. So this looks really good. And I'm going to say add basic documentation structure. Yes, I want to commit everything. And yes, I want to synchronize my changes. Well, this is telling me that I don't have access to that, which is expected. So I'm going to create a fork. All right, you will probably see a very similar prompt. So create fork. Do you want console to run git fetch? No, I don't care at this point. So it's still pushing the changes. At this point, if it's the first time that you use Gitpod, you will probably have to like configure the integration and things like that. Okay, so I already have my fork online. I'm so happy that this worked first time. And you see that I have my docs directory that I'm one commit ahead of the main repository. So far so good. Okay. So, no more new questions in the chat. And so let's continue. We're only 5 minutes delayed from my initial plans, so we're doing really, really good. Okay, so this tutorial is called Document Your Sphinx Project with Markdown, but we have reStructuredText here. So just a couple of words about this. reStructuredText is probably one of the oldest markup languages that still exist. It has very old roots. It's much older than Markdown, in fact, and it's super powerful because it allows you to define your own roles and directives, which are custom blocks of syntax that do specific tasks. And it allows you to do cross-references and export the documentation to several tools and things like that. So it's a really powerful tool. I'm mixing here, for the sake of simplicity, reStructuredText, which is the markup, with docutils, which is the tool that parses the markup and does all these things. However, in recent years, probably thanks to the popularity of GitHub and virtually every other tool that uses Markdown, we see Markdown everywhere. We use it in Slack, we use it in GitHub comments, in README files, and so forth. So the idea is that try to bring this easy way of working and simplicity to Sphinx. And for that, there's a kind of a new project called Mist Parser that does exactly that. So it defines a custom dialect of Markdown that is compatible with docutils and contains all these extension points that we know and love. So we're going to convert this documentation from reStructuredText to Markdown. And for that, I'm going to install a little tool. It's called pip install rst to mist with the extra requirements Sphinx. And this is going to give me a command line tool to convert this file into Markdown. So I'm going to call it right now, rst to mist. And then I need to specify the command convert and all the files that I want to convert. So I'm going to convert everything inside any directory under docs. At the moment, I only have one file, but this is a pretty standard conversion tool. And it succeeded. So it converted index.rst to index.md. And if I display them side to side, you see that they're basically the same. I'm going to move this here. Yes. So now we have these familiar headings that we know from Markdown. This is a level 1 heading, and again, a level 1 heading. And these two blocks here are these extensions, so these custom directives and roles that also work in Mist with a slightly different syntax, but they work in exactly the same way as in reStructuredText. So now I'm going to say farewell to my index.rst. I'm going to say here, right click, delete permanently. Yes. So long and thanks for all the fish. And now I have my index page written in Markdown instead. But I need to do some extra stuff here. Let's see, I'm going to cancel my server for a moment, and I'm going to change directory to my documentation source again. If I now type make HTML, I will notice that this fails because it tries to locate an index.rst, and there's none basically because I removed it. So what I'm going to do is to enable an extension that allows Sphinx to load Markdown instead. So for that, I'm going to come to conf.py, and I'm going to add here mist_parser. So this is my extension. And before I can use it, I need to install it. So now I'm going to come to the terminal again, and I will do pip install mist-parser. This installs a bunch of stuff, luckily very quick. And now, if everything is correct, I should be able to do make HTML again. You see, now I briefly see the output. There's no red text, no warnings or anything. So I'm going to go back to build HTML and launch my dear HTTP server again, which will open port 8000. Okay, and as you can see, this is exactly the same as I had before. So now my documentation is written in Markdown, but visually for the user, there's exactly 0 difference. So I will call this a win. There's some comment in the chat. I cannot run the pip-e. It tells me that it requires setup tools base. Yes, so exactly. So you had to upgrade pip. This was released 2 weeks ago. So I'm literally on the bleeding edge. Okay, there are no more questions. So it's a good time to commit these changes as well. So I'm going to go here again, and the changes are, as you can see, let's review. So I added this mist parser extension, and I added this index.md, which is a conversion from the other one, and I removed index.rst. So everything looks good to me. And I'm going to set the message, convert docs to Markdown mist. Commit, yes. Synchronize the changes, and we're done. Okay, so time to make some more progress. Jeremy says, what is the mist parser for again? So mist parser is the tool that allows us to write the documentation in Markdown. So mist stands for markedly structured text, and it's a dialect of Markdown that is compatible with Sphinx. And so Mist Parser enables Sphinx to load .md files, basically. All right, so let's continue. I'm going to make some small tweaks to my documentation just to see if this works. But before that, you see this workflow of canceling my server and then make HTML and then launch it again and so forth. It's going to become tedious very soon. So instead, what I'm going to do, I'm going to cancel this thing and I'm going to move upwards. I'm going to install a very cool tool that is called Sphinx Auto Build. So now I'm going to pip install Sphinx Auto Build, which is created by one of the maintainers of pip, Pradium, which is also the author of Sphinx theme that we're going to use very soon. And so this Sphinx Auto Build, what it does for me is to monitor changes in the doc directory and reload the server and rebuild the Sphinx documentation every time there are changes. So now I'm going to launch Sphinx-auto build on the directory docs/source, and my output directory will be docs build HTML. So now I launch it. Again, it's telling me that there's a server. So I need to open it again. Hey, what's going on? Okay, it took a few seconds, but it's here. And now every time I modify the documentation, this is going to be automatically reloaded. So I'm going to get away with this because I rarely use it. It's going to add some visual noise. And I'm going to simplify this heading here. And you see, I removed this stuff, and now, well, if it doesn't reload automatically, you can like make some change to the file to force a reload here. Yes, now it says Lumaki only. I'm going to give you a trick that many of you will appreciate. You can thank me later. So, you know, I already wrote some documentation about the project here in the README. So why not including the README in the documentation? And it turns out that with Mist, this is really, really easy. So I'm going to add a directive called include. This is the syntax for directives, okay? So they come in triple backticks, and in braces, they include the number of, sorry, the name of the directive or similar. And I'm going to tell it to include the readme.md, which is 2 directories above, and to keep the images in order. And I think I can remove this one, this level 1 heading now. And if I now see what is the result of that, nice. So you see, I get the README here, so I don't need to state it again, like the description of the project and everything. And finally, I'm going to add a little note that says that this library is still under heavy development with the admonitions that we know and love. So I'm going to open triple backticks again and open an admonition called warning. And then the content will be, this library is under heavy development. Okay, so if I go back here, you see, I get this warning here. All right. There's some questions in the chat. Great tutorial, but can you also showcase the code documentation? Yes, not so fast. Give me 15 minutes or so. Stanislaw got a little bit lost. How did you install the Mist parser extension? I did pip install Mist parser. I think this should be in the notes, but there's a chance that I forgot. Yes, I forgot. So it's pip install Mist-parser. Thank you, Jeremy. Okay, so again, it's a good moment to commit. Let's review what we have here. So I replaced this level 1 heading with including the README, so I don't repeat myself. I added an admonition, a warning admonition, and I removed this extra information here. So I'm going to say add minor edits to index, commit, changes, and we're done. Okay, so let's continue then. Now we're going to see how we can customize Sphinx a little bit more. So I'm going to go back to my conf.py. I already enabled one extension here, and this is a third-party extension, which means that I both have to install it and I also have to add it here to the list of extensions. By the way, I'm realizing that I forgot to add it to the requirements, so I'm going to do that right now. This is mist parser. And I'm going to add that to my commit, declare mist parser as dependency. Right. Just so I don't have problems later on. I was saying that I added this third-party extension, but Sphinx has a number of built-in extensions. So for example, there's a very simple one, sphinx.ext.duration, which gives me in the output of the build how much time did it take to build each of the documents. So you see now I have this extra information here, and this can come very handy for certain workflows. And these extensions, apart from modifying the behavior of Sphinx itself, allow me to customize the output as well. So for example, I'm going to add another extension that allows me to change the theme. The current HTML theme that you see here is Alabaster, which is the default theme and has been the default for a long time. But to my taste, there are now more modern options to it. And in particular, I'm going to declare here a dependency on Furo, which is the name of the theme. I'm going to pip install Furo. So as a third-party extension, I also have to install it. And finally, I'm going to change the HTML configuration from Alabaster to Furo. So now when I come here, haha, I get this new theme. And well, there's lots of cool things about Furo, but my favorite one, probably without anything else, is that you can change between dark theme, light theme, or make it automatically follow your browser and operating system configuration. So I think it's easier to see if I leave the light theme on the screen and everything. And so I'm going to leave the light theme here. And there's a question about Sphinx and Jupyter book that I think we can answer at the end. I'll be happy to discuss about this because it's a little bit long. Okay, so I modified my theme. I added an extra extension. So I'm going to commit my changes again. Let me go to the source control view. Let's review what we have. So I added one extra extension to my optional dependencies, and I enabled a built-in extension from Sphinx and changed the HTML. So this looks good to me. Change theme to Furo. And I sync my changes and whoop, errors. What happens? Let me try again. Okay, false alarm. Okay, so let's continue now. We're going to see how to add cross-references, which, as I said, is one of the strong selling points of Sphinx. And for that, I'm going to add some extra content to my documentation. You also have here in the notes, but I'm going to type it all along. So I'm going to come here and add a new file that I'm going to call usage.md. The first thing you will notice here, I'm going to pay some more attention to the output now, is that Sphinx gives me a warning because usage.md doesn't belong to any talk tree. We're going to fix that in a moment, but this is an important warning because it means that your users will not be able to reach this document. There's no link pointing to it, basically. So I'm going to add a title, usage, and it will have one section, which is installation. So to install Lumake, you can do this. And I'm going to add a code funds console, and I'm going to give some installation instructions, right? Pip install Lumake. This doesn't work, but let's pretend that this library is already famous, okay? So this is how my Markdown looks like, but I keep getting this annoying warning here. So let's address that now. I'm going to split my screen so you can see this file on the right. And here, well, it's complaining that usage is not included in the talk tree. So let's add that to the talk tree. And the way to do that is to include the name of the document here. And that's it. So what this did was to declare that usage is a child document of index. And this is the first step towards building our tree of documents. All right, so now if I go to my documentation, you see that now I have like a contents table and I see the headings here. So I go to usage and here the instructions that I wrote before. All right. What do we have? Are there other themes for Sphinx? Yes. Sphinx themes. There's this wonderful gallery here that I shared with you in the chat. So there's Alabaster, which is the default, Read the Docs theme, which is the one that we developed for our sites, Furo, which is the one that we're using now, Book from Jupyter Book, the PyData theme, and many others. Okay, so you can have a look there. May you also suggest some blog or some good resources for practical Sphinx documentation? Yes, let's get to that at the end. Okay, so yes, I added a document and now it's part of the talk tree, but I can do much more. So for example, I can generate a reference to that document. And notice that if I navigate here, the URL is something like, I don't know, weird subdomain.gitpod.io/usage.html. So how do I generate a link that is robust against changes in the domain name? Because the structure of the documentation is going to be the same. So instead of hard coding the path like that, I'm going to use one of the Sphinx roles. So I'm going to say, for further info, check out, and then I'm going to add the doc role, specifying that I'm generating a link to the usage doc. And again, this is the syntax for roles in MIST. And what this does is, if I go back now, you see to generate a link to the usage, so I can go back and forth between one place and the other. And this is independent from where the documentation is hosted. All right. Apart from generating links to the document itself, I can also generate a link to a specific subsection of the document. So for example, imagine that I want to generate a link to this installation part here. So the easiest way to do that, this is another trick. We're going to enable another extension here in the conf.py that is going to generate targets for every subheading in every document. So for that, I'm going to enable the sphinx.ext.autosection label extension. And after I do that, now here in index.md, I can say read installation instructions in, and then there's another role, which is ref. And here the reference is the name of the subheading. You see, so this is installation with capital I, and I use that here. And that means that if I go back to my index, now you see I have usage that goes to the document, but I also have installation that goes to this heading in particular, all right? So I'm generating two kinds of cross-references here. Okay, so I see there are no more new questions in the chat, so it's a good moment to commit again. Let's see what changes do we have. So I enabled one extra extension so I can generate cross-references to subheadings. I added a couple of cross-references to several parts of my documentation and added usage to the top three. And also I added this usage document with some extra content. So I'm going to say add usage document and cross-references. Commit and sync. Perfect. Okay, and now we're going to see a couple of very interesting things. First, we're going to see how to integrate Jupyter notebooks, which I hope is very useful for the PyData global audience. And right after that, we're going to see how to automatically generate documentation from my source code, which is sometimes a little bit tricky, but I'm going to give some tips. So before that, let's get to the notebooks part. And luckily, again, this VS Code has a way of using notebooks. So I'm going to create a new folder here called notebooks, so I don't mix them with the others. And inside of here, I'm going to create a new file called tutorial, right? So I'm going to write the tutorial for my library in the form of a Jupyter notebook. VS Code automatically detects that this is a Jupyter notebook, so it gives me this preview here. Let me see that this works. It tells me to choose the interpreter, so this is the Python 3.8 that I want. And here's the Zen of Python coming in. There's a lot of new servers opening. I don't know what this means. So I'm going to close these notifications very gently and ignore them because my web server is still running on port 8000. So I don't care about the rest. Okay, so let's add some silly content for a tutorial, right? I need a heading. Lumake is very easy to use. Import the function, right? And now I'm going to say from Lumake import get random ingredients and call the function, right? And now I get another Python cell doing get random ingredients. That should give me a list of strings. And I say, don't speak in Italian for consistency. Okay, so this is the tutorial for my very simple Python library. You see that every time that I was modifying the notebook, Sphinx auto build is rebuilding and rebuilding again the documentation. However, for the moment, it's ignoring the file, so I don't see any warnings here that it's not included in any talk tree or anything. So I need to do some more work. Thank you, Reshama. I don't know this video, but please share it in Slack later on as well so I can have a look because I think this chat is lost after the call. Okay, so now what do we do? How do we include this notebook as documentation? So we need an extension again to do that. There's two that do this. My favorite one is NB Sphinx, and you also have Mist NB, which does more or less the same thing. And since it's a third-party extension, I also have to install it. So let me declare it as the list of my dependencies. Now I will do pip install NB Sphinx. Now let me force a reload of the documentation just to check what is my current status. Notebook error. Pandoc wasn't found. Okay, so I need some more. Luckily here in Gitpod I can sudo apt-get install pandoc. This is used to convert to HTML. All of these instructions are also in the notes. And let me force a rebuild of the documentation again. Okay, so I get now the warning that I wanted. The document is not included in any talk tree, all right? Which means that now Sphinx is detecting that this is a valid source file, but I need to do the same thing that I did before. So I'm going to tell Sphinx that the tutorial is also a child of index, all right? Optionally, I could add a talk tree to use it, for example, but I'm going to keep everything in the index. No warnings here, which means that now I have my usage, which is the same as before, but also I have my tutorial. You see, and now this is like any other documentation page with its headings and everything, but all the code cells are highlighted with the Jupyter color scheme, and all the outputs are included and everything. So this is a very cool way of adding documentation to your projects. And to link with what Vivek was asking before, Jupyter Book is a framework built on top of Sphinx that takes this idea to the next level. So it invites you to write a lot of documentation in notebooks and provides a lot of tooling to do that. Reshama asks, is Gitpod temporary or can you go back to the same environment in a week or two? If I recall correctly, Gitpod pricing gives me a few free hours per month, 50 hours per month. And so, yeah. So I think you can go back to it if you pay, if you start paying. It's perfect for now, for this tutorial, but yeah, you will need to keep paying, I think. I don't recall if there are like options for open source projects or open source developers or things like that. If anybody knows a little bit more, feel free to share. Okay, so I have my notebook as part of the documentation, so it's a good time to commit. Let's see what we have. So I added an extra extension, NB Sphinx. I enabled it in my extensions list. I modified the index to have that document be part of the talk tree, and I added the notebook itself. Oh, I love this div view for notebooks. So I'm going to commit that and say add tutorial, right? So commit, now sync, and we're done. Okay, so I'm going to close the tutorial. I'm not going to do anything else with it for now. And now let's go to another of the interesting parts, which is how to automatically generate documentation from code. All right. So to do that, I'm going to add some extra content here to the usage. All right. And this is also in the notes. So I'm going to add another section called creating recipes to create a recipe. And here comes a very interesting thing. So Sphinx has tools to document code objects in several domains. So if you go to the documentation, to the domains documentation, you see that with SQL, I think it's these damn ads are making the computer slow. Okay. So there are several domains. There's the Python domain, C, C++, JavaScript, and then naturally reStructuredText, and that's it. And there are extensions that allow you to document other languages like .NET or things like that. So we're going to use just that. And there's a catch because this syntax is not supported in Mist, but that is not a problem because Mist allows me to introduce blocks of RST. So, if I use this directive, now I can include any restructured text code that I want. Now, you don't need to copy this one because I'm going to remove it in a moment. But this is how I would document a Python function. So ingredients kind equals none. And then you would put here all the parts that describe the function behavior. So one line description, return a list of random ingredients. And then we specify that this has a parameter kind, which is an optional kind argument. This parameter kind has type list of strings or none. It returns the ingredients list, and the return type is again a list of strings. So this is how you would manually describe a function in Sphinx. And if I now go to my documentation, back to the usage page, you see now I get this beautiful rendering of my documentation. So I see the parameters, the return type, and you see that it's now mixing the parameter name with the parameter return type and the description. However, I told you that I will do away with this code because normally we don't want this because it's much more efficient to write this in the docstring of the function. Oh, give me a second. I want to split this the other way around. Oh, why? Okay, so you see, this is the code that I showed at the very beginning, and it already has this code, and this is valid restructured text. And I want to find a way for this docstring here to be part of the documentation automatically without having to type it again. So for that to work, I'm going to do several things. First, I'm going to enable another built-in extension, which is called sphinx-quickstart autodoc. Let me see, yes. And after I do that, now I can remove all this thing, remove the function signature, and instead use the auto function directive. And now I'm going to go here, and you see that I have exactly the same result. Just to verify that this works, since I installed my library in editable mode, I don't need to reinstall it again every time I make changes to the code. So now let me add an extra line here, like for now, random list of ingredients is hard-coded. All right. The documentation doesn't rebuild because I didn't make any changes inside the docs directory, but I forced that. And now you see I get this, for now, a random list of ingredients is hard-coded. So Sphinx is reading the Python doc string and it's placing that inside the documentation itself. So I don't need to write it myself. This is as easy as document your code and then Autodoc will do the rest. Okay, so let me see if there's some more questions. What if I need to create hyperlink to my code documentation? I'm glad you asked. So now how do we generate a hyperlink to that? So for that, we can use another role. You can use the, and now I'm going to put here the role pyfunc, specify the name of the function. All right, let's wait for the rebuild. And you see, now this generates a nice hyperlink. And you notice, in fact, that, sorry, let me go back to usage again. When I click it, this will be highlighted, you see? So it's taking me to these headings here. And again, this works in the same way as the doc and ref roles that we used before. So this is independent on where the documentation is hosted. Okay, so let's finish documenting our library, shall we? Because we have a function, but we also have this invalid kind error that is raised in some conditions. So notice first one thing. This is already described in the docstring of the function, you see, but notice what happens when I include that in the documentation. So now, sometimes an error will be raised, and I'm going to use the eval rst directive again, and I'm going to call now the auto exception directive with Lumake invalid kind error. And now you will notice some magic happening, because not only does the docstring of the error appear here, but a cross-reference from the docstring is created automatically for me. So if I'm reading the function documentation, then I can click here, you see, and this takes me to the error that is raised. I find this absolutely magical. So this is what I did here. And in the same way as before, I can generate an inline cross-reference to it by using the py exception, I think. Let me see. No, I made a mistake here. Sorry. This is not py exception. So this has to be py exc. Yeah, sorry. The roles have like a shortened version of the name. Sorry about that. Also, I made a typo. Invalid kind error. Nice. So you see, now I see cross-references to the function and to the error here. Questions? Does the automatic creation of the function documentation also work with different doctoring formats? Excellent question, Tim. So there's a Sphinx extension called Napoleon. So Napoleon extends the Autodoc capabilities to support two very popular style guides, the NumPy style guide and the Google style guide. So you're probably very familiar with NumPy examples. Can I have an example somewhere? Yes. You see, this is a typical docstring in NumPy that has these parameters, the returns, races, see also, notes, references, whatever. And there's another style guide that I have actually never used, which is by Google. And it's like a similar idea, but with different markup, you see. So there's args, returns, and so forth. So Napoleon allows you to use this kind of docstrings on your project. I'm going to share the link. Must the race exception error be part of a class for this link to work? I don't get the question. Sorry, Jeremy, if you can rephrase a little bit. I don't understand if you refer to the docstring here or to the markdown that I'm adding here. So I'm going to jump to the next question in the meanwhile. Do we need to list all functions, classes, and error one by one, or can we add all as a list from a file? That's another excellent question. We're not going to do that today because we don't have enough time, but there's an extension called auto summary in Sphinx that does exactly that. It generates an automatic summary of all your documentation. So again, I'm going to share the link here. And there's another one that works in a slightly different way, but does the same thing, which is sphinx-auto API, which is in our GitHub organization, but it's maintained by the community. Auto summary imports the code. Sphinx Auto API parses the code. So they work in slightly different ways. I'm more used to Auto API these days because it's more convenient, but they are mostly the same. Okay, so it's another good moment to commit these changes, please. So let's review what we have. I added an extra line to the docstring so I could see the changes. I enabled the Autodoc built-in Sphinx extension so I can add cross-references to, so I can automatically generate documentation from the code. And I added a bunch of content to the usage, including cross-references, code objects, and so forth. So I'm going to say document Python code, commit, sync, and there we go. Okay, we are reaching the end of the tutorial, which makes me enormously happy because that means that we will have some time to chat at the end or to do some extra stuff, perhaps. So now it's the time to deploy this documentation. So far, I've been using like this Gitpod thing that is very convenient. But Gitpod is not permanent, and this is using the Python HTTP server, which is not necessarily a production solution. And so there are several options to deploy this code. So you have several providers of static documentation that you can use, like Netlify or GitHub Pages, things like that. But instead, we're going to use reDedocs because it allows us to do some extra stuff. So reDedocs, rather than hosting the HTML, it's going to build the HTML for us. And it will also give me like versions, server-side search, and many other things. So now I'm going to change the platform for a moment. Let me, this is my fork. Yes, and these are my commits. So everything looks nice online. If you want to try this or to have a look at my progress so far, you have this. But this is temporary anyway. So the one that is going to stay is the original repository. And I created a branch called tutorial steps where you have like how all the project looks like at the end, in case you got lost or you want to go over this again or anything like that. So now it's time to open Read the Docs. I already have an account here. Otherwise, you can sign up with GitHub. It's really quick. And what I'm going to do is import these documentation projects in my account. So I'm going to go here to my dashboard and click this Import Project button. It's very important to refresh this list of repositories because now it says that I don't have any repositories, but in fact, if I refresh, this Lumake one will appear here. If this fails for some reason, then you could import manually, but doing it this way has a bunch of advantages. So I'm going to import it. I'm going to call it Lumake PyData tutorial, whatever. So the name is taken. Sorry, you cannot use it. And all the rest of the options are okay. So this is the URL of the repository. It's Git, and the default branch is main. So let me hit next. And now the project is created. And right after it's created, it's going to try and build the documentation. So now I'm going to go to the builds section here. It also says webhook successfully added, which means that every time I push a new commit of my project, it's going to trigger a new build. So let me see how this looks like. This is triggered already. Come on. I guess like if some people are following along, we perhaps are overwhelming the servers, but I hope that that is not the case. And anyway, like this, this will need a few seconds to trigger anyway. In the meanwhile, to not be here like looking at this spinner, I'm going to advance that this build is going to fail. Okay, it's already cloning the project. Perfect. So this build is going to fail because we are not telling Read the Docs how to install our code or what dependencies does it need or anything like that. So it's going to try to make a guess of how to build it. You see that by default it uses Python 3.7. We're going to change that now. By clicking on these elements here, you can see the logs. And finally, this failed. You see this was doing, rather than doing make HTML, it was calling this Sphinx package directly, but the result is the same. And it failed very early saying no module named missed parser. So I need to tell Read the Docs that it has to install the code. And for that, I'm going to go back to Gitpod and I'm going to create a new file, which I will call .readthedocs.yaml. Has to be called exactly like this. It's again in the notes, but I'm going to share it in the chat just in case. And I need to add some configuration here. So I know this by heart, and I also have some notes, but you can check the documentation for this online. So you have some examples or valid configurations here. I'm going to share this URL with you as well. If you can ask a question on this step with your microphone. Yeah, Rishama, of course. Unmute yourself, feel free.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Very, very low.
Very low, okay.
Perfect now.
I'll try to speak up. The question that I had to ask was, and I don't know if you covered it, but can this also be hosted on GitHub Pages?
Yes, so the workflow is slightly different. On Read the Docs, all the build process is taken care. So you don't have to define like a file that says, okay, do make HTML in this step and so on and so forth. However, the downside of that is that you have a little bit less flexibility on the process. So you have like a super weird documentation pipeline, or you have to run some commands or things like that. There are hacky ways to do that, but no, it's not officially supported. Like you can add some sub-process calls to conf.py, but it works. It's just really ugly. And so the way you would do this with GitHub Pages is that you will have to import like GitHub Action or things like that build the documentation for you and then store the HTML files as an artifact. So yeah, that would be the difference. However, there are some things that are a little bit difficult to replicate on GitHub Pages. For example, like if I go to the documentation of my open source Astrodynamics library that is also hosted on reDocs, you see that there's several versions here. So I have an older one, which is 0.14, 0.15, which is the latest one, and so forth. So this sort of multiple version documentation is really handy, and it's very easy to set up on reDocs. It just uses GitHub branches for that. And there are other things like the server-side search that is enhanced. So for example, if I go back to the documentation of reDocs itself, and I start typing here, you see I have this search as you type, and this is going to make a search and so forth. So there's like a few things on top of just starting files hosting. That's the thing. Having said that, yes, you can host Sphinx output in GitHub Pages if you want, but you miss all these extra features.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to, because I just went through the process and I hosted my project on Read the Docs and I did some research, and it just clicked in my mind like, oh, I can run the docs locally, but then I have to find a way to host them, right? Mm-hmm. And I think initially I didn't make that connection, and the fact that there's GitHub Pages option and Read the Docs, but Read the Docs has more options like in terms of search and such.
Yeah, okay. Okay, yeah, thank you very much. We're almost at the end. So at this point, if someone else has any questions, let's put that at the end. So I was saying that I need to define a configuration file now to tell reDocs what to do. And I share with you the documentation for that, but I'm going to copy that from my notes. So I have to specify what is the version of the configuration, usually version 2. There's no point in using version 1 anymore. It's deprecated. Now, this is a thing that we introduced like 2 weeks ago. So we specify that the Docker image is going to be based on Ubuntu 20.04. This doesn't mean that it's using the Docker image of Ubuntu, of this version of Ubuntu. It means that we have our own Docker image that has this operating system as the baseline. And now I'm going to specify that I want some extra tools, and in particular, I want Python 3.9. Okay, I don't want to jump into 3.10 just yet, because I don't remember if Sphinx is already compatible with it, so I don't want any breakage. Let's stay with 3.9 for the moment. Now I need to specify that the Sphinx configuration lives in docs/source/conf.py. And finally, I need to specify that to build the documentation, you need to do this step that I did before. You see this pip install -e.doc. So the way to say that is by saying that I need to install some Python code with pip. It's going to be the current directory, so this path here, and I'm going to add the extra requirements coming from the doc optional dependencies. Okay, so unless I made some mistake, I think this is correct. I need to commit and push for this to work. So I'm going to go here. The only change is adding the documentation file. That looks good. So I'm going to say add read the docs configuration. Yes, I want to commit. Yes, I want to sync. Okay, and since I have a new commit here, you see this one 12 seconds ago. Now, if I go back to read the docs to the builds page, you see now there's another build that got triggered that is now installing the code. And you will notice that instead of using the 3.7, Python 3.7 that was using before, now it's using Python 3.9. We do that through a tool that it's called ASDF, which is like PyEnv, but it also works for Node and Go and Rust. All right. So you can install all those tools on read the docs as well, in case you need like to build some front-end assets or something like that. Now this is installing some base dependencies. This should be quick. So let's give it some seconds. Maria Jose, really nice tutorial. Thank you very much. And Bram as well. Thank you for the workshop. I'm glad that you're enjoying it. Let's see the final result. So it's installing some baseline dependencies. And now you see it's doing the pip install .doc. So this installs Lumaki, but also Furo, MB-Sphinx, Mist Parser, and all of that. And it's already finished. So if I now go to view docs, I have my Lumaki documentation in all its glory with the usage, the cross-references working, the tutorial that is working here as well, and so forth. Here I have the flyout menu in case I want to specify some extra versions or things like that. And that's it. That's about it. I'm really happy that everything worked more or less first time. So now let me finish and wrap up going back to my slides. So as I shared in Slack and here in the chat, these slides and all the material of the tutorial is online, so you can check it out. If you see an issue or have a suggestion, please talk to me, open an issue there, let's discuss. Parts of these are based on the Mist introduction. That is very cool. This is the Sphinx tutorial that I am writing in collaboration with the community. Sphinx was lacking a tutorial for many years, and now it's very complete. It basically covers all the steps that we did today and some more. However, it's written in reStructuredText. And you also have our read the docs tutorial that I also wrote in coming months. And it covers things like how to import your project, how to customize your build process, how to add versions to your documentation, and so forth. So you have all this information here. And if you want to reach out to me, I'll be around for the rest of the conference. I will try to attend some networking in Gather Town. You can drop me an email, and I'm usually most active on LinkedIn and Twitter. So thank you very much. And I think I can take some extra questions from the audience. So Donnie says, is RTD always open to the public? For instance, if I want to document a company internal tool, could I use RTD with a login? Yes. Thanks for asking. So for that, you would use readthedocs.com instead, which is our commercial offering. And it gives you some extra features. In particular, you can have private projects, and you have more resources and things like that. So if you're interested, drop us an email. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Radovan. good to see.